Shabbat shalom. Nice to see you in the rain. This morning we have, following our study, there's a service, lovely kid having her bar mitzvah, and then there's the first special of Pesach Kiddush will be served. There'll be bagels, but the rest of it is special Pesach. There's the building's kosher now. Come in. For following service, they start studying where?
Youth lab to be our home.
In the new youth lab, the Zicklin Lieberman says Lake. Zicklin Lieberman Youth Lounge. On Monday morning, there's Siyum B'Chorim. Anyone who is a firstborn who would like to be released of your obligation to fast Monday. There's a service 7:30 in the morning here, of course, followed by some learning together, and then we'll have a bit of a chumetz fest. And then, of course, the holiday begins on Monday night. People have seders, right? Okay, so the seders to go to. Services will be Tuesday and Wednesday mornings in the synagogue. First day will be in the big shul, and the second day is smaller, the Sheryl Padi. And then the following week, it's Monday, Tuesday, and Tuesday is Yisro. Okay, did I get that right? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, whatever it says on there. So it's the truth. Okay? And we wish everybody a very happy, a very sweet holiday. We all know that the Seder and the Passover is about the Exodus from Egypt. But there is a subterranean theme, a second theme, that you'll find both in the Haggadah and in the scriptural readings for the holiday. It's a second theme which the rabbis wanted to introduce as a sort of contrapuntal theme to the principal idea of slavery from Egypt. And so in the Haggadah, when you finish the four questions and you begin the reading of the answer, the Magi, you'll notice that it has two different beginnings. One of the beginnings says that tells the story of Egypt. We were slaves in the land of Egypt. The other beginning goes back farther and talks about our ancestors were idol worshippers in Haran, in Mesopotamia. The second theme of the holiday is idolatry, which is related to the principal theme because the notion is that idolatry is a form of slavery. That idolatry is a form of slavery of the mind to a certain set of images of divinity. That when we limit divinity, when we limit God to something that we can see or we can touch or something that we can wrap our heads around, instead of something that is purely transcendent, we limit ourselves. So this idea that at the same time as we are being liberated from Egypt, we are also being liberated from idolatry. Liberated to worship a God who is purely transcendent. Remember when Moses goes to the burning bush, the question he asks God is, what's your name? First he does it in a sort of ruse. He says to God, when I come to the people and I say that the God of their ancestors has released them, is liberating them, they're going to ask me, what's his name? So what's your name? He says to God. Now, it's an interesting idea. What's your name means, give me a label. Give me a tag. Give me a hashtag. Give me an email address. Give me some way to connect with you. Give me something that is finite in my world that I can wrap my head around that will comprise divinity. And God's answer, of course, is remarkably obscure. And I'm going to say it's intentionally obscure because the divine answer, because God's answer is, there is no label for me. I'm bigger than that. I'm bigger than all labels, by definition. Transcendence means bigger than anything you can imagine. And God says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, which literally means I will be what I will be. And then later in the same paragraph, he calls himself Ehyeh, I will be. Now when you say I will be, what you're saying is you can't label me. Because what I am now is not what I'll be later. I'm becoming. And there's no single thing, there's no image, there's no label, there's no name, there's no myth, there's no rite that can capture me. God is infinite in that sense. So in a certain way, God is that part of us which is always pushing beyond. Becoming, always pushing beyond. And there's a human thirst for that. I want something that's always pushing me beyond. Something to keep growing toward. An ideal to keep pushing toward. but it's difficult to sort of express that. So what we do is we tend to put names on it. So we call it God. Give it a name, Lord. And then we create rites and rituals and symbols for this. And then pretty soon what we discover is that we're not worshiping the God of the transcendent. We're worshiping the rites and the rituals and the symbols. And that's what's called idolatry. It's when you delimit God beyond God's pure transcendence. Does that make some sense?
Sure.
Yes.
Right? You delimit God beyond God's transcendence. That's what's called idolatry. Now where do we get the symbols? And what we tend to do is we tend to project our own needs into the universe and then reappropriate them as if they were God. God looks a lot like us. There's a church, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go to Israel, to the north of Israel, the town of Nazareth, which of course is Jesus' hometown. There's a church there called the Church of All Nations. It's a beautiful church. I mean, the last thing you think you do in Israel is go visit a church. But you go visit the Church of All Nations, and what they did was they went around the world and asked artists from all over the world to create images of Jesus. Now, in the Jewish tradition, you're not allowed to choose any image for God, but in the Christian tradition, you're permitted to do that. So they asked artists all over the world to create mosaic images of Jesus, and they're all on the walls. And here's what's beautiful. The artists from Africa, imagine Jesus is black, wearing a dashiki. And the artist from Norway imagines Jesus is white, on skis, I guess. And the artist from Japan imagines Jesus looking Asian. And the artist from Arabia imagines Jesus looking... And every nation imagines Jesus in their own image. This is a typical human move, because transcendence is by definition beyond labels, beyond description. We try to create images, and we tend to project ourselves. We create God in our image. We create God in our image, right? And by the way, Americans, we're really good at thinking that whatever America does, God blesses it. We're one nation under God, indivisible, right? I didn't make that up. That's but that idea that God's on our side, right? God's on our side, right? I always love those images, before, starting with the Newt Rockney story and all the way through, images of sports teams that ought to gather together and, let us pray, Lord God, make us play well. At the end of the game, they'll ask one of the athletes, how did you succeed in catching the pass or making the basketball? Making the basket. All glory to God. God wanted UCLA to win, right? Or in this case, North Carolina, So, I mean, the idea is that we tend to make God look a lot like us. That's a form of idolatry, because you're delimiting God. It's the worship of the is, not the ought. The worship of what is, not what will be. The worship of that which I can delimit and describe and contain and define and describe, instead of that which is beyond all description and beyond definition. That's the move of idolatry. And the reason why idolatry, besides the fact that it's beyond, because it'll never satisfy you. Because if you stop with that, that's where you stop. That's where you stop growing. Then you stop growing as a spiritual human being, and it becomes a form of slavery. Now, if Moses is the guy who frees us from Egyptian slavery, who is the guy who frees us from idolatry? Who is the character, as it were, of the Bible who represents the battle against idolatry? And the answer is Elijah. Eliyahu HaNavi. Now, who was Elijah? Historically, Elijah is a prophet who lived in the north of Israel in the 8th century BCE. So really quickly, here's your history, right? We come out of Egypt, we cross the desert, we settle in the land. 200 years later, we ask Samuel for a king. He gives us a king. His name is Saul. He's a lousy king. He dies in battle. King David becomes king of Israel. King David unites the tribes of Israel into a great nation, creates his capital in Jerusalem, makes us a powerful nation. When he dies, his son Solomon takes over. Solomon builds the holy temple of Jerusalem, expands the boundaries of Israel, and we have the golden age of the Israelite kingship. Solomon dies, and all hell breaks loose. The people of the north come to his son Rehoboam and say, lower our taxes. We can't stand the burden you put us under. And Rehoboam, being a very silly politician, says, I'm going to raise your taxes. And so the northern kingdom splits from the southern kingdom, and now in the world you have two Jewish kingdoms. So far so good? This takes place somewhere around 930 BCE. Okay, the northern kingdom is ruled from a town called Samaria, the southern kingdom in Jerusalem. The northern kingdom, the first king is a guy named Jeroboam. He builds a kingdom of some power, right? And then when he dies, there's no succession plan, because unlike the south, you don't have a dynasty. The south has the dynasty of David, so you always know who's going to take over because it's the next relative in the house of David. But in the north, you don't have that. So what you have is turmoil. And Rehoboam's taken over by one of his generals, who's killed by one of his generals, who's off by one. It's like The Godfather, right? And finally, a general named Omri takes over. Omri settles the kingdom down, begins to make it stable. And when he stabilizes the kingdom, he turns over his kingdom to a son whose name is Ahab, Achav. Ahab, he got the name, of course, from Moby Dick. So, Ahab, and one of the ways that he stabilizes the northern kingdom is he creates an alliance with the people of the north, the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians are a seafaring people in the north of Israel, live in Lebanon. And the way he did that, Omri did, is by marrying the princess of the Phoenicians to his son Ahab. The princess of the Phoenicians' name is Jezebel. That probably wasn't her name, because Jezebel in Hebrew is He-Zevel, which means she's trash. That's probably what the New York Times called her, but I don't think that really was her name, right? She was probably Jennifer, Crystal, or Whitney, or Miley, or something, or Brittany, something. But anyway, her name is Jezebel in the Bible, which must have been very funny when they wrote it. And Jezebel moves in, and Jezebel brings all of her gods with her. Now the gods, the worship of foreign gods in an Israelite kingdom was not unusual, first of all, especially in the north, because you're living in a very mixed population. And whenever you marry into people of the land, you carry their gods into your home. So the gods of the neighborhood now become the gods of this kingdom. And that's when Elijah rises. And Elijah is facing this king who is very powerful and very wealthy. The kingdom by that time had grown very wealthy. And this is who Elijah is. And he lives in that century. Now, just to go forward and see what happens in the end, he becomes the great symbol of the fight against idolatry. We'll see why in a moment. Okay? And in later tradition, he is associated, because he's loyal to the people of Israel and loyal to the God of Israel, and imagines a time when idolatry is abolished, he becomes associated with the Messiah, with the once and future king of all of Israel. And that is actually, if you look at the back page I gave you here, you see where it says Malachi 3? Malachi is the last prophet of the Hebrew Bible. And he imagines that one day Elijah is going to come and get the kingdom of Israel ready for the coming of Messiah. And this is what he writes: Lo, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the coming of the awesome, fearful day of the Lord, right? He shall reconcile parents to children and children with parents, so that when I come, I will not strike the whole land with utter destruction. And that day, Yom Adonai Hagadol v'Hanorah, that last day of history, Elijah is going to come and welcome the last day of history. That's going to be the beginning of the Messianic era, and Elijah is the one who's going to come and tell us about it. Okay? That's his place in Jewish folklore. So far, so good? That idea that there's going to be a day at the end of history when all the world will be liberated from idolatry sort of conforms to a notion of a Pesach of the future. So this section that we're reading right here, that's today's Haftorah. That's the Haftorah for today. And because that day is called Yom Adonai, the day of God, Hagadol v'Hanorah, big and nasty, awesome, okay, makes this called Shabbat Hagadol. It's called Shabbat Hagadol because it's after this Haftorah, Yom Hagadol. Because, and in the Seder, what you're going to do is you're going to bring in Elijah at the end of the Seder. The first half of your Seder is all about the Egyptian experience, the Pesach that was. The second half of your Seder, after dinner, if you get to that part, is all about the Pesach that will be, the Messianic time when the world will be liberated, and you're going to welcome Eliyahu, and you're going to have some words about this Yom HaGadol, this end of history time coming. Is that clear? So Elijah becomes the sort of Moses in the battle against the slavery of idolatry. That's how he's understood in Jewish folklore, okay? Historically, he was a prophet in the 8th century fighting Ahab, and Ahab's usurpation of power, but in folklore he becomes much bigger than that. He becomes this great symbol of the release of the Jewish people from their idolatry. Okay? Any questions so far? Is that clear so far? These devices have brought music into our lives, so I have no problem. It's wonderful. Wherever you are. I was doing a funeral and someone's phone went off. You know? Actually, it was the dead guy's phone. So. I'm so sorry he can't come to the phone right now. Is there anything you'd like me to let him know? Yes, please.
So are we saying that he's Mashiach?
No. He is the precursor, the announcer of, the welcomer of, the symbol of the beginning of the maybe it's coming Mashiach. Right. Okay? He is the announcer of. Okay? The advanced guy. There you go. Right. The advanced guy for the Mashiach. Yes, please.
What are
the Mashiach's characteristics?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
What will the Mashiach be?
I don't know. That I can't tell you. That's not in our curriculum today, but that's a fabulous question.
Okay.
All right? I can tell you this. It'll be great. It'll be so great you won't want to be there. So there'll be peace and justice and low-calorie food, everything. Okay, what? Because the second half, the first half of the Seder is Pesach la'avar, Pesach that was. The second half of the Seder is Pesach la'atid, the Pesach that's yet to be. So the first half deals with history, and the second half, and memory, and the second half deals with the future and with our dreams. What's our dream for the world? That's what the Messiah represents, and that's what Eliyahu represents. And for the tradition, the idea that human beings will let go of the projections of their own fears and imagine a God who invites us into a world of our becoming. That's the Messiah. That's exactly the liberation of Messiah time. That's what Eliyahu represents, okay? Yes, please.
But then to follow up then.
Yes.
We invite him into our home and he's supposed to be welcoming in like welcoming in this wonderful era.
Messiah time.
The paragraph that we read at that point is
Yeah.
all fire and brimstone.
Oh, yeah.
So we're welcoming in this wonderful.
Well, you have a lot of
era.
Jewish rage pent up. You have a lot of Jewish rage pent up, right? And so what happens is Elijah's coming, and instead of bringing a time of peace, before he brings it, he's going to bring justice. And justice means that all those nations that have been womping on the Israelites and Jews for the last lots of thousands of years, right, are going to get theirs. Okay? So the line that you read before that is Shvach HaMasar al HaGoyim, which means, go get them, God. Just like you got the Egyptians, make the list. The Poles, the Germans, the Babylonians, the Russians, all of them. Now, what happened is it's not a very beautiful messianic image. So there's an alternative text, which you can find in my Haggadah, the VBS Haggadah, and it's a text that I actually stole from another Haggadah, from the Hartman Haggadah, which is a beautiful text, which says the opposite. Basically, it says, there have always been people in the world who have stood with us. So, dear God, go share your love with them. So the line that we read is, Shvat ahavatcha al hagoyim asher yaducha, which means, pour your love on those among the nations of the world who have known you and have stood for your goodness in the world. And that, to me, is a much more messianic formula than the traditional expression of Jewish rage. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at Elijah. Let's find out who he really is, okay? So Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel the 38th year of King Asa of Judah. Ahab, son of Omri, reigned in Israel for 22 years. And the Bible doesn't like him. What was displeasing? So you have to sort of ask, well, then why did he last 22 years in a dangerous job? Okay, and what happens is, in the early years of Ahab, there's a terrible drought in the north of Israel. And the drought was interpreted as a sign from God. So that Ahab puts out the word that I want this guy Elijah. And Elijah comes and meets him, even though there's a contract out on it. So that's Kings 18. Everybody see it? When Ahab caught sight of Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" And he retorted, "It's not I who brought trouble on Israel, but you and your father's house by forsaking the commandments of the Lord and going after the Baalim." What are Baalim? Baal was the Canaanite god of thunder and lightning and rain. And that was the principal god that people worshipped in order to gain fertility in their fields. Okay? Now summon all Israel to join me at Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel is that mountain just outside of Haifa. Okay? Together with the 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So in the Canaanite pantheon, you had two gods. The male principle of the universe was understood as Baal. He was represented by a bull. Okay? He was said to live in the sky, and when Baal was good and ready, he made it rain on the ground. Mother Earth was Asherah, or Ishtar, or Esther, right? Asherah, and she was represented in two ways, either by a tree, or if you had one in your house, a little doll, a little idol, a little statuette of a woman with large breasts and a swollen belly. She's the goddess of the fertile earth. He's the god of the fertilizing male principle of the universe. Jezebel brought all these priests into the kingdom, because that was her faith, to bring rain onto the ground and to bring fertility. So Elijah says, have all the prophets of Baal and Asherah meet me at Mount Carmel. This is the showdown at the OK Corral. This is such a great Western, you know. Here's Doc Holliday, right, and Wyatt Earp, and this is like High Noon. Anyone know what old cowboy movies look like? Right. Back to the Future Part 3. For those of you of another generation. Okay? Ahab sent orders to the Israelites and gathered the prophets in Mount Carmel. Elijah approached all the people. So you have this contest on Mount Carmel. They have this huge crowd. Elijah approaches the people and says, "How long will you keep hopping?" And the word hopping is piseach, from the word Pesach. Right? You're hopping. That's another reference to this, right? Between two opinions. If the Lord is God, follow him. If it's Baal, follow him. But the people answered not a word. Why didn't they answer a word? Because they were synchronists, which means they were hedging their bets. Right? They worship anybody who will bring me rain. Right? And we know this, by the way, because we know that at the same time as the kingdom was Jewish, it was in every town that we've ever excavated from First Temple period, we find these little dolls of bulls and pregnant ladies. So we find Baals and Asherahs everywhere, all over Israel. The people answered not a word. Elijah said to them, "I am the only prophet of the Lord left." Jezebel killed all the other prophets, while the prophets of Baal are 450 men. So let's have a contest. Let 2 young bulls be given us. Let them choose one bull, cut it up, lay it on the wood, but let them not apply fire. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and not apply fire. You will invoke your God by name. I will invoke the Lord by name. Let us agree. The God who represents with fire, responds with fire, that one is God. Seems reasonable, no? And once and for all, we'll find out it was God, right? Right? And the people said, go for it. So Elijah said to the prophets, choose a bull. You prepare it first. You're the majority. Invoke your God by name, but apply no fire. They took the bull that was given them. They prepared it. They invoked Baal by name from morning till noon, shouting, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no sound. No one responded. So they performed a hopping dance around the altar that had been set up. When noon came, Elijah mocked them, saying, "Shout louder! After all, he's a god, but he may be in conversation. He may be detained, or he may be on a journey, or maybe he's asleep and will wake up." This is hysterical. So they shouted louder and gashed themselves with knives and spears, according to their practice, until blood streamed over them. And when noon passed, they kept raving until the hour of presenting the meal offering, till 3 o'clock. And there was no sound, no one responded, and no one heeded. Then Elijah said to the people, "Come here." And the people came close. And he repaired the damaged altar of the Lord. Elijah took 12 stones, corresponding to the number of the tribes of Israel, to whom the word of the Lord had come, Israel shall be your name. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. Around the altar he made a trench large enough for 2 seahs of seed. He laid out, it's a lot. He laid out the wood, cut up the bull, laid it on the wood, and said, fill 4 jars with water and pour it over the burnt offering and over the wood. And then he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And do it a third time. They did it a third time. Till water ran around the altar and the trench was filled with water. And when it was time to present the meal offering, 3 o'clock, the prophet Elijah came forward and said, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you are God, and have turned their hearts backward. Then fire from the Lord descended and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, the earth, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. And when they saw this, all the people flung themselves on their faces and cried out, Adonai hu Elohim. The Lord alone is God. Anybody know, by the way, when we say that?
Yom Kippur.
Yes, the last words of Yom Kippur. So the last words of Yom Kippur, we get to play Elijah's magic trick, right? Then Elijah said, seize the prophets of Baal, let not a single one get away. And they seized them, and Elijah went down and he slaughtered them all. Okay. What did he do? Did you get the story? Don't turn it over yet. Let's get it down. What did he do? Come on, somebody tell me what he did. What he did. What he did. No. He demonstrated once and for all that the Lord is God, right?
Sacrifice.
Did he do it? He put a bull on an altar, right? And he said, listen, it's too easy. Dump water on it. Dump more water on it. Dump more water on it. Till there was 12 jars of water poured on it. 12 is a big number for him. And then out of the sky came fire, and it consumed everything, right? And once and for all, we know what? That God is God. Right? Ta-da! How many times have I wanted to do this? Maybe Yom Kippur. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, instead of sitting there praying all day long, just have fire come down from heaven and consume the board of directors. Whoosh! Right? Lord God, show us that you're the whoosh. That would be a number, wouldn't it? Wouldn't you all go, whoo, Adonai hu Elohim? Wouldn't you all become from? Wouldn't you start keeping kosher after that? You'd start coming to shul, you'd put on film. Wouldn't you do that? Yes, of course you would. You'd become very religious, right? Would it do it? No, come on, seriously. How long do you think they stay faithful to God after this?
3 days. 3 days.
What, you cynical people, you? This was this cool miracle. This is a cool, what a great miracle. You produced a miracle. You're skeptical. Why are you so skeptical?
Because we know Jews.
You know Jews. Is that it? Is it Jews? Is it only Jews or people in general?
Because we are Jews.
Because we are Jews. Why are you so cynical? Seriously, why are you so... That wouldn't convince me. A big magic trick like that wouldn't do it.
What can you do for me now?
What can you do for me now? So what's good and what's bad in what Elijah did? Did he prove once and for all that the prophets of Baal are false and the prophets of God are true?
Of course.
Yeah, for that moment he did it, right? Hell of a trick, right? Why are you so cynical that it wouldn't change the course of Jewish history? And why don't we do this today? Seriously, why isn't this should be a ritual. Shouldn't we be doing this today? Cut up a bull, put it on an altar, call for God, see the fire. Today it'd be so much easier to do because we have lasers and stuff, you know. Yeah, please.
It seems that if your belief is based on evidence, then you need a constant stream of evidence.
All right, so if you say belief is based on an empirical thing, I have to experience it to know it, right?
And keep experiencing again and again. To keep
Well, that's the problem. The problem is this, number one, if your orientation to the world is based on that kind of an experience, will one experience do it? You need what you say, you need a constant stream of experiences. By the way, can it be refuted?
Yes.
How do you refute it?
It's an accident.
I don't believe it.
Say what?
Say, I don't believe it.
Well, no, but you just saw it happen, so how would you refute it?
Another magic.
A bigger trick, yeah, get 2 bulls and 20 jars of water, or an elephant and, on their face, I don't know. give me a bigger miracle and you'll prove that it's not true, Wendell.
What's disturbing to me about this is that it seems to be a dance with God.
Yeah,
It says in here, answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, for you have turned their hearts backward. And it's that question I always have about whether
yeah.
it's whether we have free will or we don't. If God is making people not believe, then
I don't think God's making them not believe. I think that he's allowing them to not believe.
then what does it mean you have?
I think you've let them go. You have not shown yourself in so long that they've forgotten who you are. I think that's how I read it.
Okay.
But now the question is this, I mean, is seeing believing? Does this cement faith? What did Elijah accomplish? That's the question, yeah.
Well, you said the word magic.
Yeah.
Go back to parting of the Red Sea.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough. Diamond wasn't enough.
Yeah,
We see Pharaoh's magicians making snakes.
yeah.
So they may have been accustomed to magic and tricks, and they may have felt this was a better trick that Elijah performed than the worshippers of Baals.
Yeah, but you see the question, but listen, by the way, not just them. I mean, we do this now, don't we? You know? I'm gonna run for president. I can promise you anything, right? I can show you tricks, right? I mean, think about how much the same mentality applies, right? You know, the promise of the miracle, of magic, the promise of magic, right? You know, yeah. Want to add something?
But if everybody needs to have that sort of magical trick in their life, then there has to be a trick for every person in every
Yeah.
generation. Like
Yeah.
those people at that corral, they might have been God-fearing for the rest of their lives, but when they tell the story to their children,
Yeah.
they say, well, you're probably.
Nah.
That's probably.
You imagine some cynical 13-year-old going, nah.
So if you need
Yeah.
a religion of faith, then.
Okay, it doesn't last generation to generation, that's one problem. I don't even know if it lasts in one's own personal memory, that's the problem. Now, if it doesn't work, and Elijah knows the history of his people, why did he do it? I mean, think about this man. He was the last, what happens is, I didn't give you the backstory, but he was part of a school of prophecy, and all the other prophets were destroyed by Jezebel. So there's this impulse to want to get even. He wants to get even with these guys, and he wants to prove once and for all that he's right. Right? Everyone wants to, you want to prove your theory, you want to prove your vision of the world. And to do it with a giant magic trick on Mount Carmel in front of the eyes of the world is in some ways deliciously satisfying. Once and for all, we'll see, is it God or is it Baal? No more religious dark, you know? I mean, get all the religions of the world on a mountain somewhere. It's like a Star Trek, you know? And all right, you worship Jesus, and you do Muhammad, and you do Buddha, and you do Adonai, and we'll see who's the real, we'll see who's got the, you know, once and for all, that kind of impulse. You anyone ever have that kind of impulse, once and for all? Yeah, Mark.
What disturbs me about this is, it's still going on today among some religions. You either convert or you die.
Yeah.
You either believe what I believe in, or here's the sword.
Oh, yeah, no, this is an exclusive religion, right. Religion by sword, right, yes.
The problem I see with this is that it removes the personal engagement,
Yeah.
personal
Yes,
action.
right.
And the skepticism that I am always
Yeah.
battling with is, how much is it my control, how much is it left to faith?
Right. It's a magic trick. And you're supposed to go, ooh, you know. I mean, if magic tricks made people get faith, David Copperfield would be a rabbi. I mean, think about this, right? Yeah,
First of all, you see what you want to see.
yeah,
Second of all, God is too great to be worshipped by one religion.
okay. See, one religion, so the question is, if only one religion contains God, then you're back to that idolatry problem again. So Elijah succeeds, but he doesn't succeed. And I think at a certain point he realizes that he's failed terribly. Because instead of making God God, he's made God into just a bigger idol than Baal. Right? God can do magic tricks better than Baal, but that doesn't make God God. And so now he gets very depressed, and he does what prophets do in every generation of the Israelite story. He goes out to the desert to get his head straight. So that's what he does.
5 weeks ago, we read K.T. 7,
Yeah.
the Golden Calf.
Yeah, yeah.
And then all those people, theoretically actually experienced God, and yet, the shelf life that came was 40 days.
Right.
Isn't he aware of that, Elijah, by the time he spoke?
Apparently not, or apparently the impulse to once and for all prove that I'm right. Once and for all, you'll see that I'm who I say I am, right? Okay? That impulse is still very much alive. Okay? Turn the page over. Here's another famous story about Elijah. Ready? When Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he put all the prophets of Baal to the sword, Jezebel sent a message to Elijah saying, "Thus and more may the gods do if by this time tomorrow I have not made you like one of them." So she puts a contract out on his life. She's going to get him killed, right? Frightened, he fled at once for his life. He lives in the north. He goes to the south, to Beersheba. He came to Beersheba, which is in Judah, left his servants there. He himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, just a scrappy bush, and sat down under it, and he prayed that he might die. Enough, he cried, "Now, O Lord, take my life, for I'm no better than my father's." So he's despondent and he's suicidal, right? And what is he saying? God, kill me, right? It's sort of death by prayer. I can't accomplish anything. I can't fix, you sent me here to fix your people. I can't fix them any better than my predecessors could. He lay down and fell asleep under a broom bush. Suddenly, an angel touched him and said, "Arise and eat." That's how you know it's a Jewish book. You're depressed, have a bite to eat. We'll talk theology later. First, eat something, right? So he looked about, and there beside his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and he drank, and he lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, or the journey will be too much for you." So he rose and he ate and he drank, and with the strength that was from that meal he walked 40 days and 40 nights as far as the mountain of the Lord at Horeb. 40 days and 40 nights. That sound familiar to anybody? And he ends up at Horeb. Another name for Mount Horeb is? Sinai, the magic mountain. Now, before we go back to the Elijah story, what happened on Sinai so far that we know? First, Moses is a shepherd to his father-in-law in Midian, and he's grazing his sheep up on Horeb, and what does he see? The burning bush, right? And then it's the burning bush that God calls him out of his private life to go to Pharaoh and let my people go. Now he brings the people back to Horeb, and at Horeb he gets the 10 Commandments. They spend 2 years at Mount Sinai getting all the commandments of God. That's the second event. So going to Mount Horeb is this moment of connecting back with the Moses story. You see all these connections that are built into the story? So here is Elijah, and what is his problem? He's despondent because he was sent to bring the Israelite people back into loyalty to their God, and he can't do it. And he's tried all of his magic tricks, and he can't do it. And he's just despondent, and he can't accomplish anything, and he thinks his life is over, and his life is a failure. So he goes back to Mount Horeb to somehow connect with the God who sent him to begin with, right? Everybody okay so far?
Yes.
Good. When the Lord, then he went to a cave, and there he spent the night. Then the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "Why are you here, Elijah?" Now stop it. That's an interesting question. Why are you here? What kind of question is that? Think about that question for a minute. When Moses went up to the bush, what did God say to him? Did God say, "Why are you here, Moshe"?
No.
When the people of Israel got there, what did God say to them? God said, "Why are you here?"
No.
What is he saying to Elijah? It's really an interesting question. I think it's an interesting question. And here, what is here? Does here mean on this mountain? Or does here mean in the world? He's asking, who are you? Who do you want to be? What's the purpose of your existence? Because look at the answer. He says, the answer is not, if he says, "Why are you on the mountain?" the answer is because I'm lost. But the answer is bigger than that. He replies, "I am moved by zeal for the Lord God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left, and they are out to take my life. Right? I am the last Jedi. He's the last Jedi. He's the last holy, the last faithful man in Israel. And I spent my life trying to protect this faith and to teach it and to promulgate it. But instead, what's happened? Everything that's sacred to me has been taken from me. That's why I'm here, because I'm desperate, because there's nothing left for me. And he wants to die up on that mountain. So now God comes to me, and you have to look at the answer to understand the question. Right? Now remember the Moses story? When Moses meets God on the mountain, what did he see? Burning bush, right? When he brought the people of Israel back to the mountain, what happened? Remember what happened? What was the mountain like when he brought the people of Israel back? The mountain was quaking, it was smoking, it was thundering, it was lightning, it was violence all over the place. Listen to Elijah, right? And lo, the Lord passed by. That's an interesting statement, right? And there was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks by the power of the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire, and the Lord was not in the fire. So we had all the special effects we had at Sinai. And what does the Bible tell you about each one? That's not where you're going to find God. Those kind of events, those phenomena don't contain the divinity. They're just symbols. And then, after the fire, and there's a Hebrew phrase which is really untranslatable, but I'll try. Kol demama daka. Kol means voice or sound of. Demama means silence. Daka means delicate, fine, refined. The sound of delicate silence.
So we do Paul Simon.
Hello, Elijah, my old friend. Right. The sound of delicate silence. I put the whisper of silence, but you can figure out whatever you... It's the sound of a delicate silence. When Elijah heard it, now what does it mean to hear the silence? He wrapped his mantle about his face and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And then a voice addressed him a second time with the same question. Why are you here? And he answered, I am moved by zeal for the Lord God of hosts. The Israelites were forsaking your covenant. Same answer. All right, tell me what happened. This is the text. Tell me what happened.
He realizes his purpose.
Okay. So you think that when he says the same words. God asks him twice, right? Why are you here? Why are you in the world? The first time he says that line, and then the second time he says that line. How is it different?
When he's in a cave.
Tell me again. Yeah.
When he's in a cave, and
Yeah.
after he's out on the mountain.
Yeah, but what's the difference in the way he says it or what he means by it? Look at the event. Look at the event. The man said, why are you here? He gives an answer. Then you have this revelation of fire and brimstone, and then it says, Kol mataka, and then the same question and the same answer. I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. And I want you to hear the difference between the two. Okay? What's the difference between the two statements? How does the man change? How does this experience change you? Israel was changed by Mount Sinai, right? They came to Mount Sinai as a rabble of slaves, and they see the power of God on Mount Sinai, and it says they feared, and when God spoke, they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we'll do everything God says. But now we discovered that it's not the fire, and not the quaking, and not the wind, not the power, but something else that touches the heart of this man. You see where we are here? Now, by the way, it's really interesting that religious history focuses not only on nations and trends and sociology, but on the inner experience of one human being. Here's one desperate man on a mountain cave, on a ledge in front of a mountain, trying to figure out what his life is all about. And what happens to him? And that's the question, what happens to him? You want to answer what happens to him?
Maybe when he heard this silence, he felt that God is close to him, and it was
So that, what, the silence indicates to him that he's,
That God is closer, that he's closer to God.
okay, and that God is with him,
Yeah.
that he's not alone. Okay, good. Yes, please.
It's the absence of magic, and it's the choice of the human being. All of the wind and the splitting and it's just like when the fire started, and that was all magical, and it's a trick, and Elijah knows that. But when there's silence, that's the spot where Elijah gets to be a human and step up to the plate, make the decision to have faith, to have belief,
Okay, good.
which is what he's been complaining that the Israelites don't have. So he makes that decision.
Yeah,
It's like the choice for sobriety, one moment at a time.
okay. And part of it is a personal question. Have you ever had a moment, an Elijah moment?
It's just an
Go ahead, please, go ahead.
It's just an aha period.
Go ahead, tell me about that.
It's just, I got it. I finally got it. That's what it is.
What did he get?
What am I trying to tell him?
Well, what did God want to tell him?
You just told me.
No, say it. What did God want to tell him?
I'm not good at speaking.
No, you're doing fine.
I'm here with
Just
you.
I am who I am, and that's it.
Uh-huh. Yes,
I think the silence tells him that the world itself is the magic. And you don't need entertainments like what you said, David Copperfield or fire and all that. Just look around you and that is the magic. So the silence brought attention to the real magic.
okay. So I see, the fire, the wind, the earthquake. Yeah, that's impressive, but that's not what you're really looking for in the end. All the way back there, yes, please.
I think it gives him a chance to reflect.
Uh-huh.
And it is in that reflection, and that moment, that he begins to once again engage in his purpose.
Mhm.
And until he has it, everything is happening on the outside. Now he has to go internally.
Right? Inside. Yeah, Brian.
As near as I can tell, the question, where are you, Elijah, and the response are exactly the same both times.
Yeah, it is.
What's different is Elijah, right? On the
Yeah.
one hand, he's going into the cave to hide or, lick his wounds or whatever the case may be. And on the other one, after that encounter with, the fire and the sounds of silence, he's coming back out of the cave.
He goes into the cave, and the first time he says it, it's an expression of exasperation, frustration, and failure.
Right.
He comes out of the cave, and the second time he says the exact same words, but this time it's an expression of purpose, courage, and resolution.
Conviction.
That's the change that took place. And I'm asking, what happened to the man that turned it from one to the other? David.
I think he saw the God in himself. We have a Persian Iranian philosopher who puts this very beautifully in a quote, that the first he looked for God in different places, in a school, in a bar, in a prostitute house, so forth and so on, and finally he comes and puts his rope around his face, and then finds the God right there in that small space.
Ah.
Elijah finds the God there within himself.
Very
his
nice.
own soul.
Very, very, very deep. Very nice. Something that happens when you're in a place of utter silence, and you can block out all the stuff of the world. You can hear voices within. You can find things within that you can't find with all the distractions outside. Okay? And it's interesting to me that the question that God keeps asking him, in other words, when God speaks to the people of Israel, he gives them commandments. Thou shalt not. When he speaks to Moses, he gives a commandment. Go free my people. When he speaks to Elijah, all he asks is questions. This is an interesting God. This is a God who doesn't command. This is a God doesn't tell him what to do. God just says, what are you doing in the world? Isn't it interesting? Isn't that an interesting God? You'd imagine a God would give you a commandment. This isn't a commanding God. This is an inquiring God. And it's up to man, it's up to the human being to find the answer. Right? Go ahead, Sharon.
Has he gotten caught up in ego a little bit in the prophet?
Oh, you think maybe?
So
So maybe he needs.
Watch me cut this bull into a million pieces, pour water on it, and make fire from the sky? You think maybe there's a little bit of, a little Vegas showmanship? Today, we'll remember Don Rickles today, so, you know. All right, dummies, you know, look at this. Right? A little showmanship here? A little, I'm more important than the mission that I keep? I'm so important because I'm the prophet of God? So there's a little bit of defeating the ego here, sure. Oh, gosh, yes. Gloria.
I think what it comes down to, the answer is he realizes that Selim Elohim,
Yeah.
that God is within him to take up on what this gentleman said.
Yeah.
The realization, God is within me.
It's interesting that God doesn't tell him what to do. He tells himself what to do. It's all within. It's all deep within. Yeah, Martha.
Didn't you say that the commandment isn't really a commandment, it means instruction?
Instruction, commandment, connection, there's all kinds of words, but none of that's here. All he does is that, all this God does is ask questions. And the question's the same question twice, and it's not a question about the universe or a question about God. It's the most personal question. Why are you?
But commandment has a different meaning than instruction.
Yeah, but it doesn't, the point is none of it's there. All of it is just inquiry here.
It's also that he realizes that magic, tricks, or whatever won't help him to achieve his
Yeah.
goal. It's him himself who has to do all the work.
It's gotta come from someplace else.
It's at that time that he realizes that is
Yeah.
he the one that has to
Yeah,
go and do it.
yeah.
As we went through it, I kept thinking of the prophet Jonah.
Okay.
There's some familiarity of the Jonah story.
Right, so the prophet Jonah is caught up in this tempest, this hurricane, and then gets tossed overboard and spends 3 days at the bottom of
And
the
the
sea.
whole mission
Right,
of Jonah.
right.
What does he say?
And God keeps asking him questions too. All he questions. Please.
It's as if it's a juxtaposition of the Moses mission who led Israel with fire and brimstone, and now in this later generation, it's a different literary or religious experience that we have to bring it on our own, and that there isn't going to be that sort of presence of God. We'll have to ask ourselves, what is our mission here on earth, because there isn't the leadership from God.
So is it God who's changed? Or we've changed? Or maybe it says, the Moses thing didn't work. You know, all those miracles and,
Well,
you know.
it accomplished its mission in that it brought Israel.
It got us out of Egypt, but
now
it didn't
for
get
Act
Egypt
2
out of us, you know.
Now for Act 2, we have to be the religious saviors of our own life.
You have to be the religious creators of your own.
And going into the cave could be a metaphor from actually retreating from all of that fire and brimstone.
Yeah.
Because it isn't in the world that we have to find, that it's in ourselves.
Okay, good, Jerry.
I also thought about this being sort of a riff on the Moses story.
It is.
Because there are so many parallels.
Yeah.
So Moses' response to the call at his bush was to say, I'm not a man of words. And so I can't be a leader. And God said, don't worry about it, we'll have a surrogate, I'll be with you,
Right.
make a staff,
Right.
we'll do things. And Moses never quite learned the lesson that the words aren't important. Leadership is charismatic or idealistic, whatever. And I think this prophet, who is a man of powerful words and actions and magic tricks and so forth, has learned the lesson that what's important is not all that. It is the person and what he does with his life. To make changes.
So I'm going to take a piece off of the wise Jerry Rabo here. If this is a midrash on the Moses story, right, it's also a commentary on the Passover story, right? God was not in the wind, and not in the earthquake, and not in the fire, but he discovers God in that delicate silence that he discovers on that mountaintop. So here we have this Seder, and what's it full of? wind and fire and earthquakes, right? Frogs and gnats and splitting seas and at a certain point, maybe the idea of bringing Elijah into the second half of the Seder after you've had a chance to calm down and have dinner is to say, the task of getting out of Egypt isn't only a task of outside history, it's also a task of inside history. The task of self-discovery. And it's and the God you're going to find at the sea and splitting seas is not really the God who's going to live with you the rest of your life. That's a God you're going to find in the quiet of the inside. It's a very interesting riff on Pesach, right? It's almost like empty Pesach. Like, put away the plagues and the sticks that turn into snakes and listen, listen. Call them Amataka. And by the way, just for those of you who are not in the meditation minion, there's not a lot of Kol D'Mamataka in Jewish life. I don't know if you know this. A lot of words in Jewish life. You pick up a prayer book. The first word of the prayer book is, there aren't any words for you, God. And then for 800 pages, right? You pick up a Chumash and it's God who's beyond words, and it's 1,200 pages. You have a rabbi who says you have to listen within, and the rabbi just won't shut up. You know, there's not a lot of silence in Jewish life. It's like Moses won and Elijah lost. So maybe at the end of the Seder we're being told, the freedom you're looking for is in the silence within. It's in there.
Maybe you could say that Elijah has a more mature understanding of God than Moses.
It's a different, I wasn't mature because that's already judgmental. It's a different understanding of God than Moses. It's a different place, it's a different kind of understanding of God. You're right. I mean, some of us need magic tricks, it's true. Right?
You're not going to get that anymore in the world.
No, I don't know. Don't you watch these guys on television? They raise the dead. I watch these guys all the time. My brother Jimmy Swagger. No, you don't watch it. I love these guys. No, you don't watch them, huh?
Hitting a basketball shot at the end of the game is not a miracle. It's the result of hard work and effort.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, tell that to the guys in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Please.
Doesn't the silence make him get the connection?
Yeah, that's right.
Feel empowered enough to continue?
So that's the structure of the narrative, right? You have exactly right. At the beginning, he's frustrated, he feels he's a failure, he wants to die. Then there's the silence, and then he repeats the same words, but with a completely different attitude, a completely different spirit, right? I know there's lots of comments, I want to just finish really quickly. So take a look.
What's the purpose of the cup of wine for Elijah?
Right, well, the idea is that you're welcoming him into your world, because he's the precursor of Messiah. And at the end of the Seder, you're welcoming him into your home because you want to enlist your home in the preparations for the arrival of the Messianic time.
He comes, he's thirsty.
Right, right. You want to welcome him.
But I always use cheap wine for him.
Is that it? And that's why the Messiah hasn't come.
God likes money.
And it says the Lord, no, he doesn't. The Lord said, that's the other reason that the Messiah hasn't come. So the Lord says, go back the way you came, and he sends him back on his mission. Just to finish the story, the reason why Elijah becomes such a powerful character in Jewish folklore, beyond what we've already just done, because he is a second Moses, but he's a different Moses, and he's a different kind of Moses character. Imagine a Moses who finds God in silence, not in earthquakes, right? And then here's the end of the Elijah story. He picks his successor, who's a man named Elisha. And as they were crossing, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I can do for you before I'm taken from you." This is the succession, right? The passing on of the mantle, literally. Elisha answered, let a double portion of your spirit pass to me. And then he says, you've asked a difficult thing. If you see me as I'm being taken from you, this will be granted. If not, not. Listen, as they kept on walking and talking, a fiery chariot with fiery horses suddenly appeared and separated one from the other. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw it and he cried out, "O Father, Father, Israel's chariots and horsemen." When he could no longer see him, he grasped his garment and rent them in two. So part of the tradition, Elijah never died. he ascends heaven in a fiery chariot, which means he's still alive in the world. And the folklore is that Elijah is still alive in the world, is in the world and preparing the world for the coming of redemption. And that you never know who he is, right? One of the beautiful legends is that he's a beggar in Jerusalem, right? So the homeless man on the street who asks you for $1, he might be Elijah, and that's the dollar that will tip the world's balance from sin to mitzvah and bring us all redemption. So be very careful who you say no to, because you don't know if you might be talking to Elijah. He could be anywhere at any time. This, I think Jerry said this before, this Elijah story is offered us today as a haftarah, and then in the middle of the Seder, as a sort of counterpoint to the other story of the Exodus, and a different way to think about what it means to bring God into the world. I want to wish you all a happy, healthy holiday.